Kevin Brennan.
Bore da, Mr. Owen. For those who don't speak the language of heaven, that means good morning. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to probe the government on its steps in relation to money transfer accounts and the remittance sector. This is a very important issue, Mr. Owen. In fact, according to a recent blog from the Africa Research Institute, the Secretary of State for International Development has described the issue as, and I quote, one of the most important things I've dealt with in my political career. So, Mr. Owen, this is an issue that's at least as important as HS2, which means that the government should be devoting at least as much effort and investing at least as much political capital to try and sort it out. She also assured UK Somalis recently in a meeting at Ealing Town Hall that, and I quote again, the best experts on the planet are working on a solution, end of quote. And that the Prime Minister himself has recognised that this needs a rapid solution to this situation, which he's described, and again I quote, as massively important, and that's the Secretary of State for International Development referring to the Prime Minister. So I hope that the Minister today will be able to update us on the government's steps so far in relation to this issue, clarify what the government's position is in relation to this matter, answer any questions from honourable members frankly, and tell us about the action that will be taken to provide a rapid solution, as the Prime Minister wants, to this, and again I quote, massively important, close quotes, problem. Now, Mr. Owen, this issue, as you will know, came to light, came to a head really last May when Barclays announced that it intended to close the bank account of most of its clients in the money transfer and remittance business. The decision was delayed, probably I think in part to a debate we had here in Westminster Hall last July, led extremely ably by my honourable friend, the member for Bethnal Green and Bow, who sat in her place here again this morning and who's led a brilliant campaign in relation to this issue, followed by several other honourable members who are here present also. So as I say, the decision was delayed partly about the closure of those accounts, but unfortunately I'm afraid to report to the House, Mr. Owen, that it was of little use to my constituent who I mentioned in that debate, Mr. Anwar Ali, whose Business Trust Exchange UK Limited has effectively been ruined by this decision by Barclays. As I said in the debate at the time, this sort of business was a model, really, I think, of the kind of small business that many honourable members here present from all sides of the House would like to see in our constituencies. Not only offering a service to constituents needing to transfer money to relatives overseas, but also engaged in charitable work, aid projects and so on, particularly in Bangladesh. I will give way, yes.
For giving way, and I wanted to make a contribution on that particular point because Sheffield, as he will know, has one of the largest, we're fortunate to have one of the largest Somali communities outside of London, made strong representation to me on this issue. But the specific point is the difficulties that are not only caused in terms of domestic and individual family distresses, from an inability to transfer money, but also from a survey I did of diaspora communities in Sheffield, the important contribution that remittance giving makes to supplement aid. And we ought to be seeing this not only as a personal issue, but as an issue in terms of international development. And that would he agree that makes it so much more important for the government to take action?
Kevin Brennan.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for intervening and, in fact, for giving me the opportunity to acknowledge everything that he said, including the Somali community in Sheffield. And also it gives me the opportunity to remind the House that Cardiff, and my honourable friend from Cardiff, South and Penarth is here in his place today, has one of the oldest Somali communities in Britain, going right back into the 19th century. And they play a hugely important and positive role in the life of our great city also. And he's right in what he says, and I'll come on in my remarks to say something more about aid later on. I will give way.
Okay, great.
My honourable friend, congratulate him on this debate, and I apologise, I'll have to leave it for a few minutes in the middle of it, Mr. Owen.
Would he also not agree that for the Ogaden Somali, of whom there are around 500 now resident in my community, the ability to remit money back to families at home is particularly important because so many of those families are suffering displacement and persecution, and therefore there is a particularly strong link to our moral as well as our economic responsibilities to those communities.
Brennan.
Well, of course, she's absolutely right. And I'm sure that that's why the International Development Secretary has, in words at least, acknowledged the importance of this subject. What we are seeking today, obviously, is to poke the government into action and quicker action in relation to this issue than we've seen so far. Yes, Owen.
I'm very grateful. I have a very large Somali community in my constituency in Ilford. I also have a large number of other people who send remittances to different parts of the world. And I just want to supplement what my friend from Sheffield said. It's not a question that the remittances actually add to international development assistance. Remittances are greater in value globally than international development assistance. And so if we start cutting off, we are actually doing serious damage to a number of countries and a number of the poorest people in the world.
Kevin Brennan.
Well, Mr. Owen, I fear if I keep taking interventions, the remarks I make in a moment or two will be less fresh and novel to listeners, because my honourable friends, with their clear expertise in this issue, are anticipating many of the points that I was going to make. But I thank my honourable friend nevertheless. Sadly, with the withdrawal of banking services by Barclays, my constituent, Mr. Anwar Ali, has had to severely run down his business, and I understand that if he's unable to find a solution to this banking problem, the business may have to close altogether. Now, Mr. Owen, it's one thing for banks, large banks, to refuse to lend to small businesses. We all know about that issue. It's another thing altogether to deny to legitimate, law-abiding small businesses the basic service of a bank account. The banks casually say it's a commercial decision. To these small businesses, Mr. Owen, it's a commercial death sentence. So let me take a moment to remind the House, as honourable friends have already done so through their interventions, of the importance of these remittances, particularly in developing countries. According to a UN Conference on Trade and Development report in 2012, for the 48 least developed countries, remittance receipts climbed from £3.5 billion in 1990 to over £27 billion in 2011. And it may be that the figure is much higher than that, Mr. Owen. In the case of Somalia alone, which honourable members have referred to, in 2012 the Somali authorities said about a third of the country's GDP, over $2 billion, came to Somalia through small money transfer agencies, and 40% of people in Somalia depend on remittance flows. So we have a situation here where a major multinational bank, itself heavily fined, by the way, for wrongdoing in recent years, and operating in a market dominated by a small number of players of its kind, large multinational banks, has withdrawn from mainly small businesses, a service vital to their existence and crucial to some of the most vulnerable people in the world. And it's difficult, Mr. Owen, to get to the bottom of exactly why this happened, because, frankly, they're not being clear about the reasons why it's happened. Is it for simply commercial reasons, as we blithely hear, or is it because of fears about terrorism and money laundering? There's a lack of clarity, really, about the reasons behind this question. Barclays CEO Anthony Jenkins said they were stopping offering bank services to these businesses because, and I quote, they don't have the proper checks in place to spot criminal activity and could unwittingly be facilitating money laundering activities and finance terrorism. But in a letter to Dahabshil, one of the larger players, payment firms, I believe located in my honourable friend's constituency from Bethnal Green and Bow, in a letter to them, Barclays said the decision, and I quote, was not a negative reflection of your anti-money laundering standards, nor a belief that your business has unwittingly been a conduit for financial crime. It is, however, a commercial decision that we've taken due to the risks of the sector. So perhaps the Minister can explain, when he replies, what he thinks is behind the fact, because I know he talks to these big banks, what he thinks is behind the fact that every single major UK bank refuses to provide banking services to this sector, effectively financially excluding them without considering each one of them on its merits. Does the Minister believe that this is purely a commercial coincidence, or does he believe that it is another aspect? And I wonder if the Civil Service box could just stop talking while I'm addressing the House, Mr. Owen. I don't think she's heard me. Thank you. Does the Minister believe that this is purely a commercial coincidence, or does he believe that it is another aspect of the overall lack of competition in the banking sector which the government is failing to address? And what can he tell us about the role of the National Crime Agency in this matter? Now, in effect, the uncompetitive major banks have erected a complete barrier to entry into the financial sector for some of the smallest of the members of the financial sector. And I wonder if the Minister would be able to tell us whether he thinks that is acceptable. In the case of the Harbshiel, they were able to win an injunction against Barclays in the courts in October, and their account remains open for the time being at least. But unfortunately, many other firms, including, as I've said already, the one in my constituency, has not benefited from this development because their accounts have already been closed by Barclays. And I wonder if the Minister in his remarks could tell us whether he believes that Barclays should offer to reopen those accounts, it's closed, before the court's decision, to enable them to be able to carry on business until the case is finally settled. That seems to me to be an entirely reasonable thing to do, which would allow businesses like the one in my constituency to get on with the business that they were doing perfectly legitimately and legally beforehand, and allow these money transfers to take place. So I wonder if he would tell us whether he agrees and will call upon Barclays to do that and to reopen those accounts until that court decision is taken. I understand that so far Barclays have refused to do this, and I hope the Minister will condemn them in his remarks for their refusal to reopen those accounts. Now, I pointed out in the previous debate there seems to be one set of rules for large banks and financial institutions in relation to this, like Barclays and organisations like Western Union, who stand to benefit from this situation. In the case of Western Union, it's been proved that they helped facilitate money laundering in Mexico. In fact, they paid a fine to the Arizona state authorities in relation to that. Yet they stand to inherit a lot of the business of these small firms against whom nothing has been proved. In recent years, almost all of the large banks and institutions have been found guilty one way or another of financial misdemeanours and have sometimes been fined. I wonder, Mr. Owen, can I appeal to you to appeal to the Civil Service box, not to interrupt the debate?
To the member who's making a very interesting contribution, and everybody is very quiet, so any noise that is heard is magnified. So I would ask that everyone in this room be courteous to the member who's speaking. Mr. Kevin Brennan.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Owen. It is unfortunate that the sound carries, but it is distracting, and I'm grateful for your assistance. In recent years, almost all of the large banks and institutions have been found guilty, one way or another, of financial misdemeanours and have sometimes been fined. But they've also been bailed out by ordinary taxpayers to the tune of billions of pounds to stop them failing as a result of their greed. And their reward for that malfeasance has been a handout from governments. But these small businesses, against whom much has been insinuated, but nothing actually proved, have been squashed by the refusal of the big banks to allow them the facilities that they need to survive, effectively denying them the air they need to breathe as businesses. This is an intolerable abuse, Mr. Owen, and the government should be acting with the utmost urgency to fix it. It has taken some steps so far, particularly in relation to Somalia, and announced in September an action group on cross-border remittances, announcing its terms of reference in December. But why, Mr. Owen, 4 months after its setting up, has, to my knowledge, unless the Minister is going to announce it today, no chair of the action group been appointed and no meetings taken place? Although I do understand that as a direct result of this debate today, a date has finally been set for the first meeting of the action group. But the record so far, I'm afraid, smacks more of inaction than action. Can the Minister tell us today who is to chair the group and confirm when it will meet? We all recognise the danger of terrorism, but why has there not been a greater focus on helping these businesses to avoid risks rather than shutting them down with no evidence of wrongdoing? I will.
Tom Baldry.
Honourable gentleman did well on that point. When the Secretary of State for International Development announced the setting up of the Action Group on Cross-Border Remittances, she said, in answer to a written question to the Honourable Lady for Bethnal and Bow, that, it would that part of it would, its purpose would be to develop a safe corridor pilot to ensure the continued flow of remittances to Somalia through secure, legitimate and accessible channels. And it gave the working group a one-year timetable. So would my honourable friend, would the honourable gentleman agree that it is not unreasonable for the House to expect that at the very latest we would expect there to be a complete solution to this problem, and that HMG should have found a way of ensuring that remittances from UK citizens can get to developing countries within the year timetable set out by the Secretary of State for International Development?
Kevin Brennan.
I do agree with the honourable gentleman, in the respect that it's important that we get on with this. And the point I'm making is that 4 months after the announcement of the setting up, the Action Group hasn't yet met, and we don't even know who's to chair it at this point, as far as I'm aware. Unless the Minister can give us more information on that later, I will give way.
I think I reflect the concern across the House that there's a lack of sense of urgency about this matter, and that we expected a great deal more progress than has been achieved so far. And the sense of urgency comes from our constituents whose families are dependent upon them. And this, in some instances, literally is their security as a family in the long term.
Kevin Brennan.
Yes, and my honourable friend is absolutely right about that. So I think we do need to hear a bit more firm information from the Minister today about when he expects progress to be made, and we look forward to his remarks at the end of the debate this morning. So, could he guarantee for us, for example, that the Action Group will meet the target group of April 2014 to formulate new official guidance, both for money services, businesses and banks, in particular around agreeing how to deal with the money laundering and terrorism risk? And will this deadline be met? And does he anticipate that this will make it easier for banks to start providing bank accounts again? And indeed, is it his intention that that's what should be happening by April, May, June, summer, or within the year deadline of this year? What estimate has he made of how many money transfer companies have been forced out of business so far, and how many will be forced out of business in the meantime due to the lack of a bank account? Now, Mr. Owen, I have already paid tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Bethnal Green and Bow, for her leadership on this issue, even though it hasn't, unfortunately, been able to save the business in my constituency. But the government must get on with finding the solution to this problem. If it doesn't, many decent law-abiding small businesses, often located in the poorer parts of our country, will be forced out of business by the indifference of the authorities to the actions of the big banks, and the livelihoods and the well-being of some of the poorest people in the world in developing countries will be placed in hazard.